it's now time for a very cool lecture, and one that I'm really excited about, because we're going to talk about how to implement CSS animations. So, as I said, you're going to learn in this lecture how to create CSS animations using the keyframes add rule and the animation property. So what we're trying to do is this animation that we're going to see here. So watch carefully at these two parts here of our H1 element. So this one fades in and it also moves in from the right side here, right? And this one moves in from the left side and it also fades in. So let's take a look again. So that's it. This one fades from the left and this one fades in from the right. So let's code these animations in CSS, and it's really cool, believe me. Now there are generally two types of animations in CSS. The first one, which is also the easier one, is to just use the transition property and then change the properties that we want to animate on an event, like when we hover the element. And I'm sure that you're familiar with this method, and if not, don't worry, because we're going to use in the next lecture. But what we're doing in this lecture is a bit different and actually a bit more advanced and cooler, because these animations allow us to put more options, and so they're a bit more complex. So let me show you how it works. So we start by creating an animation that looks exactly like we want it to be. And in order to do that, we use the keyframes add rule. So we write add keyframes, and then we give the animation a name. And we're going to start with the first part, so the heading primary main, which remember moves in from the left. So I'm going to call this animation move in left. Okay. And now in here I can specify what I want to happen in each moment of time of the animation. So we start with 0%, which is before the animation actually starts. So this can also be called the start. And then the finish is at 100%, which is when the animation finishes. But we can put other steps here in the middle. So for example, we want something to happen at the moment where the animation is at 80%, for example. And we could do 50, we could do 36, we could do any percentage here that we want. But let's just start with 0%, so the initial state, and then 100%, which is the final state. So how do we want the element to look like before it starts to move in? First, we want it to be invisible, right? So what we can do is opacity 0. So at the beginning of our animation, the opacity will be 0, and at the end, of course, we want it to be back to 1. So opacity 1. So that's one of the properties that we're animating here. Now for the browser performance, it's best to only ever animate two different properties. One is opacity, which is the one that we're using here, and the other one is the transform property. That's what the browsers are optimized for these two properties. But with transform we can do a whole lot. And so it's everything that we need actually to make all these cool animations that you can imagine. So remember that the element comes in from the left. So where do we want it to be on the beginning, before the animation actually starts? We want it to be more in the left than in the beginning, right? And so we can use transform and then translate x. And why x? Well, because we want it to animate in the x direction. So remember, the x direction is like this, so from left to right, and the y direction or axis goes from the top to the bottom. So we want to translate it in the x direction, and we want it to be more in the left than in the beginning. And so it's a negative value. So let's say 100 pixels minus, okay? Because remember that the direction goes from left to right. So a positive value means it goes to the right, and negative value means it goes to the left. So just like in basic mathematics. Alright, but moving back here, how do we want it to be when we are at 100%? We simply want it to look the way that it looks now, right? And so we say translate 0. And why 0? Well, because if we translate it 0, then it's going to look exactly the way that it looks right now. Makes sense? So this is the very basic animation, just with the initial and the final state. So let's now actually apply this animation. And so for an animation to work, there are only two properties that we have to really specify, which are called animation name. So an animation name, which is the name of the animation we just wrote, and so it's move in left. Move in left. And then the animation duration. Okay, animation duration. And so this is the time that the animation should take. Just to see it in the beginning, let's put 3 seconds. So it takes a longer time so we can see if it's actually working. Can actually put 5 seconds, then it takes even a bit longer. So these are the only properties that are required for an animation to work. Now there are a lot more properties, but I'm going to show them to you in a second. For now, let's just see if this actually works. And so we need to reload our page now. And yeah, you see it's working. Great, amazing, right? This is really fantastic. So let me play it again. So it's happening really slow because we specified it for 5 seconds, but we can then change that. Now let me play the original one again. And you see that in this version, it actually first goes a bit in that direction and then it moves back, right? Let me play it again. So it's this small movement in this direction. So how do you think we are going to do that? What do you think? And that's right, we're going to use this 80% here. So what we can say here is that we want it to be, at this point, translate X to be 20 pixels, for example. Because remember, if we're specifying a positive value here, it will go to the right side. So the final position is 0. The initial position is a lot more to the left. And then this intermediate position, let's say, is a bit more to the right. So let's check it out. And yeah, nice. That's really nice. Let's just put it a bit slower. Now that we have this animation really going on already. So just in 1 second. All right, maybe that's a bit too much. I will leave it just at 10 pixels. Great. So this already works. Now I told you that there are other properties for animations that we can also specify. So let's take a look at them. The first one is that we can set a delay. So animation delay, let's say 3 seconds. And so now before this animation starts to play, it will first wait 3 seconds. So let's take a look. All right, so here we go. So it waited 3 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, and there it goes. Okay, so that's the animation delay. Now we can also do something else. I'm actually going to comment out this part that we don't want, because this is just to show you, but I will not delete it so that you can still see it, because its properties can be very useful sometimes. Okay, another one that we can do is an animation count. Animation iteration count. So if we set this to, let's say, 3, then the animation will simply happen 3 times. So let's check that out as well. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, but we also don't want this one to happen, so I'm putting it here in the commented code. And then one that is actually quite important, which is the animation timing function. So this is a function which defines how the animation will proceed. So how fast or how slow these parameters that we specified here happen over time. And there are different built-in animation functions, for example, ease out. So ease out, for example, let's take a look at it now. Probably gonna look a bit similar, but there are different timing functions. So I already have this one here open. So we have ease, ease in, ease out, and then all of these built-in animation timing functions. So for example, with the ease in function, the animation will start slower and then accelerate over time. And with ease out, it's the opposite. So it will start faster and then it will become slower by the end. So this might sound a bit complicated, but we're going to look at animation timing functions again in another lecture. We're also going to look at this cubic Bezier function here, which basically allows us to write a custom function. So a custom timing function different from these predefined functions. And this can actually make all the difference in how the animation feels to the user. So we used, remember, ease out. So let's play it again. And this is how ease in, for example, looks like. So it was slower towards the beginning and then faster at the end. See? So at the end it happened a lot faster. So let's stick with ease out like we had at the beginning. Okay, and these are the most essential animation properties. There are actually more, but they are not really so important. You can take a look at them if you're really interested. So this is the move in left animation, but we can now also build the move in right. Let's just copy this part of the code and call it move in right. So how do you think this one will look like? So I want you to pause the video now and try to change these values here so that the animation, instead of going in from the left, it goes in from the right. So take a second and try that out. Alright, did you manage to do it? Well, let's see. What do you think is the most logical way of doing it? So all we have to do is to actually remove this minus here and put it here. And why is that? Because, as I mentioned, this 100 pixels here, if it's a plus value, it moves the element to the right, because it goes forward in the x direction. And so it's the opposite as we had before, and then the same thing, of course, here. Because now we want it to move a little bit to the left before it goes back to its original position at 0. Right? Okay, so now all we have to do is to add it here. Now, instead of specifying all of these properties here one by one, animation name, duration, timing function, delay, etc., we can simply use the shorthand property and just say animation. And so we can put all of these together, and then CSS will figure out what means what. So move in right over the duration of 1 second and with the ease out function. And that should work now. So let's take a look. And yep, so it's exactly what we had before. Great. Now maybe you have already noticing that here in the end, take a look here at this text, right before the animation ends. You will probably see a little shake here, okay? So let's take a close look at the end. There it was. So it moved a little bit like to the top. Did you see it? Let's take a look again. So you saw it moving? So it moved a little bit, so it's a bit shaky. And sometimes this happens in animations. And to be honest, no one really knows actually why this happens, but we have a fix for this. So there is something that we can do. And what we have to do in this case is to simply declare the backface visibility property. Backface visibility and set it to hidden. So the entire heading primary element, because you see that actually this entire element is what moves on this animation. So it's a bit shaky, and it's the entire heading primary element. This backface visibility property determines if the back part of an element, when we transform it, is visible or hidden for the user. So imagine we have an element and we rotate it 180 degrees. So it would be logical that we then see the back part of that element, right? But if we use backface visibility hidden, then that back part, so that part that's behind the element, let's say, that part actually gets hidden. Now in this case, we're not rotating anything, we're not doing anything like that, but we still use this fix here, like this hack, in order to fix this little shaking that we see in the animation. And again, no one really seems to know why the shaking happens and why this fixes it, but as long as it works, it's okay. And so now let's take a look at it again and look really closely here, really close, and it's gone, right? It's no longer shaking and everything appears to working just fine. And so yeah, that's how animations work. So this is a really powerful thing. And we could actually go really crazy with this. Imagine we would do something like put a 60% here and say transform at this point should be rotate. Let's say just something like 120 degree. So degree is a unit we use for rotations. And we can also say that in the beginning it should be rotate minus 50 degrees. So just some random numbers here to try out to see what happens, okay? Not really sure how it's gonna look like. So it's this crazy thing, you see? Let me play it again to you. So this is just something crazy, just to show you the power that we have here with these animations. To make it a bit more realistic, let's say we rotate it 360 degrees. Well, that didn't really work, but let's try 180 degrees. Now it should do something. Yeah. So it starts just right, then it rotates until 70%, I believe, or what was it? Yeah, 60%, and then it went back to the initial position because we didn't specify anything here. We could actually put this one here as well. So we're just playing around here with the numbers. You don't really have to follow this. I just wanted to show you that there's not really a limit. So this actually looked the same. Let me try it again, 180 this time. And well, I guess it didn't work exactly because we have to put it here in this step as well. So let's put it here as well, just to play around a little bit. And here we go. So let me close this one and of course delete this little thing that we did here, because that's just what we want it to be. You saw I selected two things at the same time. You saw that? I'm sure you can do that as well in your code editor, and sometimes it's really handy. So for example, I have this transform. If I want to select the next one, I just have to hit Command D here in this Visual Studio Code. But the same thing works in Atom or brackets or whatever. So if I just hit Command D and D and D, then I have all of these transforms selected, and you see that the cursor is blinking here. And then I can delete, and I can write something else if I want. And it's happening in all these places at the same time. All right. So this is not really CSS, but it's a nice trick that you can use in your text editor. Also, I can put multiple cursors just by clicking and then hitting Command or Control maybe on Windows, and then just keep clicking and it will add multiple cursors all over the place. You see, like this. And now if I start writing A, B, C, it's writing A, B, C everywhere. So in this case, it's not really useful, but you can do it. And sometimes it's pretty useful to change multiple things at the same time, okay? And since we're talking about text editors, I'm sure that yours also has this functionality here, which is called Minimap, which shows us a very small version of our code, so we can use this to drive around in our code or to move around. So imagine we want to go to the beginning, and then we just need to click here, and then it goes exactly where we want to. Or imagine that I'm working here and I want to go to the animations, and here I can see that these here look like the animations, and I just have to click here, and then I'm here at the place where I wrote the animations. So instead of scrolling all the way up and down, imagine we have 500 lines of CSS, then this becomes really useful. And so once again, this is also in your code editor. You just have to turn it on if it's not turned on by default. Only if you like it, of course. But I think it's pretty helpful sometimes. Okay, and that was the goal that I had for this lecture. So I showed you how animations work with the keyframes add rule, and I showed you that we can build really complex animations with this. Oh, but before we stop, I can actually show you something else, which is, imagine that we don't just want this to happen when we load the page. So imagine we want this animation to happen when we hover, for example, something. So let's say we want this animation to happen to the logo when I hover it. So let's say logo, hover. And so you see, I can actually use this animation here in multiple places. So I can just define move in right in one place and then use it all over the place, okay? And so now this will only happen as soon as I hover. So let's reload this. And here we go. You see, there it is again. So this animation does not only have to happen with the page load like we have these ones here. See, these ones are on page load, but this one is on hover. Okay, but this was just to show you. We don't really want it to be here, right? Okay, but this was now really all I had to show you for this lecture. So let's now move on to the next video. See you there.